Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 of my Game of Thrones review series. For those of you who don't know, I'm currently watching through the show for the first time and sharing my thoughts on each season. If you haven't worked it out already, in this video I will be covering Season 3. Anyway, there will be spoilers as per usual throughout this video, so without further ado, let's begin. If you've watched the previous videos in this series, you'll know that on the whole I enjoyed the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones. However, despite this, I still don't think the show managed to quite click with me during its first 2 seasons in the same way that it did with a lot of other viewers. When you hear fans talking about Game of Thrones, they usually talk about it with such a fervour, as if it's the best show in the world bar none. If I, however, were to quickly sum up my thoughts on Game of Thrones so far, I'd say something along the lines of, well yeah, it's pretty good I guess. I like it. Now you'll notice that's not quite as passionate a response as you'd expect from the rest of the fanbase, and of course part of that is just down to the way I am, but prior to Season 3 I hadn't yet found myself overcome by Game of Thrones mania. Whereas now, after binging through its 3rd season, oh boy, I've got Game of Thrones running through my veins. I wake up every morning and pray to all 7 gods.
Josh, wake up.
Go away.
You need to pray to the 7.
Screw the 7 gods, I need my sleep. Just like the Night's Watch, I abstain through sex, not through choice, that's just what comes with marriage. Ah, fuck. I can control animals with the power of my mind. And of course, I also have a guy locked up in the basement whose penis I've chopped off. No wait, actually forget that, no one's supposed to know about that, oh shit. Joking aside though, for one moment, this is a bloody terrific season. I loved it and I found myself trying to cram in as many episodes as I could each night after work in order to get through it as quickly as humanly possible. This season truly excels in terms of its character development. There's a whole list of characters who during the first 2 seasons that I didn't particularly care about, who by the final episode of this season I found myself rather fond of. And for me that is an incredibly good trait for a show to have and something that as a viewer kept me coming back for more. And on that note, let's take a look at some of the characters who I enjoyed in particular during these 10 episodes. So first up I want to talk about Jaime and Brienne, and that's mainly because I didn't really give a shit about either of these 2 last time around. Coming into this season I didn't like Jaime because of what he did to the Starks, and also because he seemed like a pompous arrogant arsehole. Whereas Brienne on the other hand I just thought was pretty dull. I didn't care for their little road trip in Season 2, and when they both appeared on screen this time around I really just wanted to jump to another location. However, as the episodes progressed, both characters became all the more compelling and I began to sympathise with both of them. For example, after seeing Jaime push Bran out of a window, stab Ned with a spear and kill a guy who looked up to him in order to facilitate an escape, I thought he was a bit of an evil bastard like Joffrey. However, after being broken and beaten by his captors, his good heart shines through when he comes to Brienne's rescue on more than one occasion. Not only does he prevent her from being raped by manufacturing a lie about her father's riches, he also jumps into a bear pit to protect her despite only having one hand. It's a stark contrast to last season when he probably would have stabbed her in the back given the chance. Brienne arguably also helps Jaime just as much as she helps him. When Jaime is down in the dumps about his stump, it's her who convinces him to eat, which enables him to carry on going. Despite being on opposing sides of the war, these 2 develop a bond that transcends all their differences. For me, the best scene involving these 2 characters came when they were both bathing. Now we've seen many a character label Jaime as the Kingslayer since the show began, a name that was given to him for supposedly stabbing the king in the back like a coward, causing many people in Westeros and most of the TV audience, myself included, to think badly of him. Which is why then it was such a shock to hear Jaime tell Brienne about what really happened for him to obtain such a nickname. Instead of stabbing an innocent man in the back, Jaime stopped a maniac who was planning not to only burn men but the women and the children too. Anakin Skywalker, eat your heart out. Jaime should really be considered somewhat of a hero, but instead he's mocked and insulted, labelled a treacherous murderer. Seeing Jaime open up to Brienne changed my views on him completely. Granted, I was already starting to like him a bit at this point, but any lingering doubts I still had about him were completely alleviated during this scene. There's also a really sweet moment later on in the season when the 2 of them go their separate ways, with Brienne addressing the Kingslayer as Sir Jaime. After she says it, for a moment Jaime just stops, aghast and shocked that someone has called him by his real name, before he composes himself and leaves. It just really makes for this beautiful moment, and you can tell that both of them care about each other a lot. And I didn't think I would find myself caring about either of them as much as I do now, so well done for the show for pulling that off. Next up are Jon Snow and Ygritte, who I have to mention simply due to the sheer chemistry that oozes from them when they are together on screen. It was alluded to in Season 2 that there was something between them, but Jon wasn't quite ready to break his oath. However, this time around he says, "Screw the Night's Watch, I'm going to lick a lady's vagina." Okay, it doesn't quite happen like that, but Ygritte does mention how she liked him kissing her down there, which makes Jon go all shy like a little schoolgirl. I really like the dynamic which this duo have. Jon is the shy, reserved pretty boy who, as I've said in the past, is the show's moral compass, whereas Ygritte is the playful, spontaneous loose cannon, the type of girl that a guy knows is probably going to be trouble but still wants to pursue nonetheless. And I'll admit it, I kind of fancy her a bit as well. She's just got this fun and attractive personality, and the pair really complement each other well. To be honest, it was kind of a bittersweet thing seeing him return to Castle Black. I really wanted it to be him and Ygritte against the world to the bitter end, however I can understand why he didn't want to betray his brothers in the Night's Watch. For the record, I don't think all the wildlings are as bad as the people of Westeros make them out to be, however after seeing Ygritte and the rest of her wildlings attempt to kill an innocent man in order to take his horses, it reminded me that Jon and Ygritte are both from completely different worlds. Jon isn't the type of guy who's going to kill someone just to steal his horse, whereas Ygritte has been living with killers her entire life. Whilst I felt bad for Ygritte when Jon left, it does seem that despite their obvious attraction to one another, their relationship may be sadly doomed to fail. The next odd couple that I'm going to cover is Arya and the Hound. You'll notice a female of Game of Thrones pairing up opposites and somehow making them compelling to watch. The Honourable Brienne and the Dishonourable Kingslayer, the Crow Jon and the Wildling Ygritte, and finally Arya Stark and one of her arch enemies, the Hound. When the Hound is picked up along with Arya by the Men Without Flags, or the Men Without Banners, or whatever the hell they are called, I can't remember, she wants him dead, which I can completely understand. However, after she runs away from said group for selling her blacksmith friend, the Hound picks her up, and I assumed things were going to go badly for her. Luckily for her, he's disillusioned and pissed off with Joffrey, so it turns out that he doesn't plan on taking her back to King's Landing at all, and instead wants to take her back to her mother and brother, and once again another unlikely alliance is formed. I already started to see another side to the Hound when he protected Sansa during Season 2, and his desire to help Arya even after Catelyn and Robb are killed, meaning he wouldn't be able to receive a reward for keeping her safe, has made him alongside Jaime one of my surprise favourite characters to come out of this season. Speaking of surprises, boy was this season full of them. I mean, I was shocked when Jaime got his hand chopped off at the end of episode 3. The funny thing is that this is incredibly tame compared to the rest of the messed up shit that occurs from this point after. For instance, I know that Ros was never a major character, but I always liked her because she had a gentle heart. So seeing her naked, stringed up like a piece of meat, which Joffrey had used for target practice and God knows what else, was pretty horrifying to see. Also, I have to say that the torture that Theon received was absolutely brutal. I played through Telltale's Game of Thrones a couple of years ago before I even started watching the TV show, so I recognise Ramsay Snow as the sadist from the game. However, when he helped Theon break free and kill the men who were pursuing him, I thought that maybe I'd got him mixed up with someone else, even going as far as to convince myself that he was on Theon's side. Cue my shock then when it turned out that Ramsay had set Theon free, only to lead him back to the prison and frame him for killing the guards. Who the hell does this? Who would free someone and then lead them back to the place where they were captured? Well, Ramsay Snow would, obviously. I mean, talk about a head fuck. Poor Theon had just confided in him that what he did at Winterfell was wrong, going as far to say that he considered Ned, the man who raised him, to be his real father. I said in my last video that when Theon opened up to the Maester at Winterfell about what he'd done, I began to sympathise with him, even despite him destroying the Starks' home. And just as I was hopeful that Theon would somehow make his way back to Robb and Catelyn, apologise for what he'd done, and be able to aid in their war efforts, he ended up back in the same dungeon that he had escaped from. Ramsay really is one sick puppy. I mean, it's something to chop a guy's dick off, but another thing entirely to dangle freedom in front of him, only then to take it away at the last second. No, actually, now I think about it, chopping a guy's dick off is probably worse. Despite Ramsay being a complete scumbag, he's so compelling to watch. He reminds me of the Joker. He's so over the top and unpredictable and makes Joffrey look like a little pussycat. And for Theon's sake, I really hope his sister is able to get to him in time. The last real surprise that hit me hard is a moment I'm sure you've been waiting for me to talk about since this video began. That of course being the Red Wedding. This really was one of those moments in which I truly couldn't believe what I was watching. When Robb apologised to Walder Frey for not marrying one of his daughters, Walder proceeded to joke about how attractive Talisa was, even saying he would have broken 50 oaths to ride her. I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a weird and pervy thing to say, but he seemed to understand Robb's decision, and was happy to be once again allied with the Starks. When the wedding celebrations began, everyone seemed happy and jolly. Robb and Talisa were seen discussing if they were going to have a girl or a boy, even going as far to say to name the child Eddard if it was a boy. Walder's daughter that had married Robb's uncle was surprisingly pretty, and the two were seen off with a bedding ceremony, with both laughing all the way. It seemed like this wedding might have really been the bright spark during all the doom and gloom of the war. However, in what seemed like only a matter of seconds, everything changed. Firstly, Walder's guards closed the door, ensuring Robb and his family couldn't escape. Walder then declared that he needed to give Robb a present, with Catelyn clocking onto something being up due to Lord Bolton wearing chainmail, not something you'd expect to be wearing to a wedding. Then, out of nowhere, one of Walder's men began stabbing Talisa in the stomach like a frenzied madman, only for Robb to be frozen in horror in very much the same way I was. Before I even had time to take this all in, Robb was then hit with multiple arrows, with him ending up on the floor. He eventually mustered up the strength to stand to his feet before Catelyn took Walder's wife hostage, begging him to let Robb go. Although Robb had sustained pretty nasty injuries, I was still thinking to myself he would find a way out. I mean, he has to, he's one of the main characters, right? Well, nope, it turns out that Walder didn't give a shit about his wife's life, proclaiming he could just find another, causing Lord Bolton to deliver the final killing blow to Robb. Catelyn then sliced open Walder's wife's throat before the same thing happened to her almost immediately after. 3 main characters dead in a matter of minutes. I can now safely say that I understand why there was such a huge commotion around this episode when it first aired. I recall people saying when it originally came out that it contained one of the most shocking scenes they'd ever seen on TV, and I chalked a lot of these type of comments down to hyperbole. However, it's no exaggeration to say I've never seen anything else like this before. Robb's narrative was one of the key story strands from this season and season 2. We'd seen him race ahead in terms of winning the war before being brought back down to earth this season after alienating the Castarks after beheading their leader. In traditional storytelling, protagonists usually go through some kind of strife before they come out victorious. Their victory has to feel earned, and a good way of presenting this is by having them overcome some kind of setback. The marriage with the Freys was supposed to help Robb get his war effort back on track. It was supposed to be his moment in which he overcame his army's setbacks and swung the war back in his favour. It definitely was not supposed to end with him, his mum and his wife dead. I can't think of another show which would have us follow a set of protagonists for so long, only for them to all end up dead. I mean, you've pretty much just written off an entire story arc with these characters dying, and that takes some serious balls. And to be honest, a lesser show wouldn't have been able to pull it off, but Game of Thrones still has enough interesting characters to make it worth watching. I also think it helps that whilst I didn't want to see any of these characters die because I wanted Robb to come out victorious in the war against the Lannisters, I did find Robb, Catelyn and Talisa's story arc to be one of the weaker elements of the show, so I'm not going to cry over seeing these characters killed off. Admittedly, I did find Robb to be a bit more interesting this season than the last. His decision to hang the Castark's men and then behead him showed he does have a darker side to him. However, he was still a bit of a blank canvas and wasn't as appealing to watch as someone like Jon or Tyrion. So instead of this being a terrible decision in killing off these characters, for me it just made me want to watch the show even more, because I want to see the ramifications of such a barbaric act. Anyway, before I move on to discussing the few aspects that I didn't like with this season, I want to briefly talk about some of the other characters that I enjoyed watching. Tyrion still remains one of my favourite characters. There's not a lot that I can say about him that I haven't said already in previous videos, however I did find his marriage to Sansa to be a very interesting development. Although neither really want to be with the other, I am glad that Sansa has someone to protect her from the dickhead Joffrey. Speaking of Joffrey, he didn't really get a ton of screen time this season, but proved to be as abhorrent as ever when he did feature. I've already mentioned what he did to Ros, but the way he insisted on harassing Sansa at every opportunity was nothing short of cruel. He threatened to rape her and then walked down the aisle with her and purposely took the stool away from Tyrion to embarrass him, and when the news that Robb Stark had died reached the Lannisters, he said that he wanted to take his head to Sansa. Thankfully, it seems that Tywin has realised what an inept leader he actually is, so I don't think he'd last long past this season. Moving on to Natalie Dormer's Marjorie, who I am a bit unsure of. On one hand, she seems like a genuinely kind and generous woman, with her going out of her way to help the poor, but on the other hand it's hard to trust her knowing that she's a bit power obsessed. I mean, she married Renly knowing that he was gay in order to be queen, and now she's marrying Joffrey even though Sansa has told her what he's really like. I mean, I certainly don't want her dead, but I am wary of her, and I can understand why Cersei is also suspicious of her as well. And the last character I want to talk about before I move on to some of my criticisms is Stannis. Now, as a person, I still don't really like Stannis. I understand why Sir Davros isn't happy with Melisandre seemingly pulling at his strings, and I don't like the idea of him killing Gendry. However, from a narrative aspect, I actually found myself getting on board with his story. In Season 2, I found all the scenes with him to be a bit of a drag, but I am enjoying watching him a lot more. I agreed with Sir Davros' decision in telling him to keep Melisandre away from the battle last season. However, when Melisandre mentioned that he would have won the battle had she been there like she originally foretold, it got me thinking about how powerful she really could be. I mean, you could argue that Stannis burning a leech filled with Gendry's blood and naming Robb Stark as someone he wanted dead, only for Robb to die shortly after, was a coincidence, or you could say there is some truth in Melisandre's claims. Let's not forget she did harbour a demon child, so I'm not going to put anything past her. Although Stannis seems unwilling to budge at the moment and is fully supportive of her magic ways, I can perhaps see him rethinking his stance next season, especially if he's presented with the choice of having to kill his nephew, and it's something that makes me think that hopefully one day I will eventually like his character. And with that, all the niceness is out the way, so let's get down to the bad and the ugly. So firstly, Sam, who I still find to be incredibly annoying. Yes, he's got a good heart, and it was pretty cool seeing him risk his life to protect old what's-her-name, not knowing that his blade could kill the White Walkers, but I'm just a bit indifferent to him and I don't see that changing. Secondly, I still don't really care about Bran or any of the characters who's hanging around with him. I'll admit his warg powers, which let him control animals as well as other humans, is fascinating, and it's obviously setting him up to play a big role in the future, but him and his entire little group could die for all I care. And finally, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room, a character I've complained about every video so far. That's right, it's Daenerys. Now, just like Season 2, Daenerys spent the majority of her time consolidating her power, something which I'll admit I do admire. Whereas everyone else is going gung-ho into battle, Daenerys is playing the long game, building up her army until she's assured enough of her chances of winning the war. It is impressive how far she's come in such a short space of time. Her story reminds me of those weird tales you see on the internet about people who trade their way up from something small to something grand. You know what I mean, like how someone can start off with a pen and then they trade the pen for something bigger and then they trade that for something more valuable, blah blah blah. That's what Daenerys reminds me of. The way in which she completely screwed over the unstudied leader after he gave her his army was delightfully devilish, as was the way in which she took the dude from Yonkai's gold and then told him she was going to take his city. She's growing in confidence as her army grows with her, and she does what's necessary even if it means going against her morals. For instance, we learnt that the 8,000 unsullied warriors all snatched a baby from its mother's arms and killed it, as their leader believed that this act would destroy any remaining weakness that they had. Quite frankly, this is bloody disgusting, and I can understand why at first she was hesitant to the idea of recruiting them. However, in time she realised that even though they had all committed a horrendous act, she wouldn't be able to get what she wanted without them. This is a complete contrast to Robb Stark, who killed the Karstarks even when knowing that it would make his army weaker, because he didn't agree with what they did. Daenerys can see the bigger picture, and it's why her influence continues to grow. Now, this all sounds good and positive, and it is, but despite this, I'm still not fond of her. And that's because the problem that still remains is the same problem I had during Season 1 and 2, in that I personally don't still have any reason for wanting her to succeed. I mean, I can get behind the Starks because what the Lannisters and now Walter Frey and the Boltons have done to them. Daenerys, on the other hand, makes references to why the throne should be hers, but this is all based on events that happened before the show even began. Events that I, as a viewer, haven't been witness to. Therefore, it's hard for me to accept, based on a few throwaway lines of dialogue, that she is the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. In addition, because I've witnessed with my own eyes what Joffrey did to Ned and what the Freys did to Robb, Catelyn and Talisa, the Stark's journey feels more personal to me. Daenerys's isn't. I appreciate what she's doing, and like I said a moment ago, I even admire the way she's going about building her army, but the long and short of it is that I still don't have a reason to care, and maybe I never will, which is a shame because I still can't connect with her story the same way that I can with other characters. Overall though, despite these minor complaints, the third season of Game of Thrones is a bloody fantastic season of TV, and for me the best season that I've watched so far. Fantastic character development combined with some truly shocking and unexpected moments made for 10 episodes that I couldn't binge through quick enough. And that's about all I want to cover in this video. The script for this video is about 4,500 words, and it still feels that I haven't really even scratched the surface, such as the sheer amount of details found in Game of Thrones. However, it's got to end somewhere, so if there is something I missed out that you want me to talk about, apologies, but please let me know about it in the comments below. Also, let me know what you thought about this video as well as the season as a whole. And on that note, it's time to say thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.